So let's have a quick look here and see if we can make head and tail of what's going on with this S4 plugin, which is under development at the moment. It's obviously designed to sort of look like a retro piece of equipment with these buttons here and what have you. As an overview, we have two voice sections at the top that have an oscillator section, which I call the tone engine, which we'll discuss in a minute, a filter section, and then some output levels and some pan here, and then it goes into this area at the bottom where you have some main amplification of the system, the main ADSR output, and then some effects, which at the moment, because this is in beta, some of these might be subject to change, but these are the ones I'm using at the moment, which is a stereo echo, a phaser, a flanger, and a reverb. Okay, over on this side of the bottom area you have a noise generation section, which is sort of independent of the oscillator, so has its own ADSR, so it could be used potentially for percussive effects or whatever. Then we have three LFOs, one of which is hardwired to the pitch of the either or of the oscillators sections, which we'll get to in a minute. Then we have an LFO that controls the filter, either one or the other of the filters. And then this one here, which is called LFO to tone, this is actually controlling these tone modification sliders that are in this system here. So let's create ourselves a fairly standard sound first of all. I'll turn down a few sliders and what have you, make sure that everything's where it needs to be for a standard thing. Let's get the filter open, turn the resonance down. Okay, make sure these switches are off. I'll explain what they're doing in a minute. Okay, and I'll turn down all of these, and I'll also turn off all the effects. So let's play a note. Okay, now what you'll notice fairly quickly is that even though everything's sort of turned off, all the effects are turned off, there's still quite a bit of movement in that sound. Okay, and the reason being is that we have here these width controls. These control multiple versions of the oscillators that are sort of detuned against each other. If I turn them down, you hear that you get a much flatter tone. Okay, so let's have a look at this oscillator section, because this is obviously the section that sort of might fool some people what's going on here. And you've got basically these 9 toggle buttons here. So what are they actually doing? Well, what they're actually doing is they're controlling the basic tone of the oscillator. So behind the scenes here, I've got a form of phase distortion synthesis, which is then going through an FM section, frequency modulation section, which you can control, and that's what's giving you the different tones. So at the moment I'm on what could potentially be called a sawtooth waveform. So let's have a look at some of the basic waveforms then. So in this, I'm just now set the thing up so I'm only listening to one tone generator, and if I click on the first one, if I play a note, you should see, even though there's still some movement in the sound, this instrument always has movement in the sound. It's never totally static. But what you'll see there is that it's a form of sawtooth, what could be called a sharp tooth as well, because it's got a slight bend to the output thing. Let's go to the second button here. Now you've got a square, something based on a square wave. Different waveform again. Different waveform again. Waveform with a lot more harmonics in it here. Almost like a vocally type waveform on this one. Again, a very thin, harmonic rich waveform. Waveform that's really a form from sine waves, I guess you would say. waveform here, which is a quieter waveform. Why it's like that will become obvious in a minute. So that's the basic tones, but then we've also got these sliders here, one each side of the system. So this one here acts as a sort of a modulator on that waveform. So let's play a note again. If I drag that down, you can see that's changing the harmonic content of that sound. But as well as that, we've also got this slider over here, which is where we introduce the frequency modulation part of the equation. So let's see what the difference that makes on a sound. And this square wave is always a good one to demonstrate this. So if I play the tone without the frequency modulation, and then I'll bring it in, you can see it's adding harmonics in there. Now the reason why we have that is because, again, this instrument's all about making movement in the sound, making the sound that's always constantly moving, that's not just a static waveform. So down here in this rate and modulation section, LFO to tone, if I make sure that we're on a sine wave here, I'm affecting oscillator 1 only, because that's, if I toggle between these, I'm affecting oscillator 2, I'm affecting oscillator 1 and 2, and now I'm affecting oscillator 1, and the inversion of this waveform is then going to 2, so it's a wider spread. But let's just change it back to 1. I'm on a sine wave here. I've got a rate at about halfway, and then if I apply this, you should start to hear that movement in the sound. And then depending on which waveform I have, depends on the effect that you get. As you can hear, some waveforms are affected more by this than others. And again, there's an interaction between these sliders as well. But basically, this slider could be considered to always be recovering harmonics that might have been lost with this other process here. Now, what you do also get with this frequency modulation slider is, if I now start to introduce, let's go back to the square one. If I start to introduce the detuning or the width on the oscillators, then you get a different effect again. Let's turn that down. Right. And hopefully you can hear that you're getting even more movement in the sound. Okay, so that's the way we can introduce movement into the oscillator section. Now, of course, there's 2 oscillator sections. We also have some things which can be done independently to each line, as it were. So we have a portamento control, which can be separate for each oscillator section, each oscillator line or voice line, however you want to call it. And we can also affect the octave. We've got a range of 2 up, 2 down on the octaves. So if I let's get, and then on the second voice line or second tone line, or whatever we want to call it, we have a similar octave range. We also have a note range there from right up through an octave, so you can actually get an extra octave up on the second line. And there's also a free detune that detunes it by a certain number of cents. Obviously, when you have both oscillators running, you know, you have detune going here, width going here, and detune going against the oscillators, plus maybe some vibrato that could be different between the two. You're starting to get a very rich moving sound all the time, which as I keep batting on about, is the whole thing we're trying to achieve here is a movement in the sound, a rich sound, a sound that never quite sits still. Okay, so what areas have we got over here to the right of the voice section? Okay, so what we have here is a state variable filter, a resonant state variable filter, which has 4 modes. You can have low, high pass, band pass, and notch. And the notch is useful for creating a phasing effect, even though we have a separate phaser down below. But because it can be controlled by an envelope, its own separate envelope, you can get some different effects there as well. But we're going to leave it on low pass for the minute. I'm on the sawtooth or the sawtooth type waveform. So let's. Okay, now, so what I'm going to do there is affect the filter frequency, bring down the filter frequency. You can hear that's there. Now let's put the resonance at halfway. Let's put the resonance all the way up. Now what I haven't done here is I haven't allowed the filter to go into self-resonance. It's a nice effect when it works well. The filters that I'm using here probably don't sound that nice when they go into self-resonance, in my opinion. It all gets a bit squeaky and a bit uncontrolled, which I know is nice for some people, but for this type of instrument I didn't think it was really necessary. So beside the filter area here where we control the frequency and the res, we then have its own dedicated envelope. So the amount that this envelope affects the filter is controlled by this modulation slider here. So this modulation slider, if I turn it up and then turn the filter down, and let's so you can hear there the filter affecting that. There, you can also affect the amount of filter modulation, should we say, by the velocity as well. So that's me playing different levels on the little keyboard thing I've got here, and that is giving you a different effect. It's affecting the amount that the envelope affects the modulation affects the filter. Okay, then we have this one here, this little switch here. Now what that's doing is it's saying, if you want, you can take the envelope here that's affecting the filter. So if we turn the modulation down for a minute, okay. But what I can do is I can now, you see I'm just got a continuous tone, but if I switch this down, now I can now use this envelope to control the level of this voice. So it's like I can independently have envelopes that independently control each voice. So if I turn this up, turn that down a bit, let's try this. Okay, so you can hear that's okay, not a particularly strong effect as I've done it there, but you get the idea. Okay, again, velocity will affect that as well. So you can have sort of almost like 2 separate synthesizer lines, effectively, because you've got a voice section, you've got a filter section, and you've got its own amp section. Now, beyond that, of course, that's then affected by the level. So, you know, you can adjust the balance between the 2 voice sections here. If you was to, for instance, turn the levels down here, you know, irrespective of what you're doing here on both of those, then you're not going to get any output out. Why have I done that? Well, because you've also got an independent noise section down here. You might want this instrument just to play the noise, so therefore you can kill the volume of both lines and just have this volume up here. So what I can do now is I could kill the volume levels of both of these oscillators, turn the noise up, and then I've only got noise coming out. So in a way you can balance between the three. That will only work, of course, if you've got the noise in this direct mode, where it's going bypassing these voices. The other way you can have the noise routed is into the filter section of line 1 or into the filter section of line 2, tone 1, tone 2, whatever. Okay, then lastly on here you've got a pan control. Which also gives you an opportunity to see the little bar graph working down here to show you how that's a stereo bar graph. Okay, so now let's have a look at the noise section here. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kill the oscillators. I'm going to put it into direct mode, so we're bypassing the filter sections here. And then let's have a look and see what we've got. So we've got a choice here. We can have basic white noise, we've got at the moment. Okay. But then if we put this little switch down here, now we can control the tone of the noise. So it's going through a highly resonant bandpass filter, which is fine. But also we have an envelope here, which is controlling the level of the noise. So let's see if we can switch that to control the tone as well. Obviously this might be useful for adding transients or some sort of effect at the beginning of the sound, and it's just a nice addition to what is, you know, otherwise a fairly conventional, rich sort of oscillator based synth. Okay, so let's turn that down. Let's go back up to, let's get it so we can hear a oscillator again. Okay, and I'm actually going to bring the other oscillator in as well. What I'm going to now introduce now is this vibrato section. So what we have here is we have rate and amount, and both rate and amount can be in either low or high range. So obviously if you have it in low range, then you're going to get conventional vibrato effects. What's this little switch here doing, this little 3 switch here? Well, you see when I toggle between them, it's lighting up 1, 2, 1 and 2, or 1 and effectively an inverse of 2 is what I'm trying to get across there. So what I'm saying is that I have a low frequency oscillator which provides the vibrato, and its control output, which goes from negative to positive. It's either side of 0, if you want to describe it as such, is actually either going to be in tune for both oscillators, so therefore it's going up, down at the same time for one oscillator, going up, down for the second oscillator, going up and down at the same time for both oscillators. When it's in this mode, then what it's doing is it's doing the inverse either side. So you get a different range. You're not going to have the pitch being the same on both oscillators going up and down at the same time. What's actually going to be happening is the oscillator 2 pitch is going to be going up while oscillator 1 pitch is going down, and vice versa. So it gives you a broader effect, and let's see if we can hear that in action. So let's get a note playing. Okay, now I'm going to add in some vibrato. Now that's with them. That's with it. With each oscillator going against each other. If that's oscillator 1 on its own, oscillator 2 on its own, oscillator 1 and 2. So you can hear that's okay, but it's quite static. Now when I go to the inverse mode, now I'm getting a much nicer sound because the vibrato is you know, each oscillator is opposed against the other one. Okay, so in the high-low ranges give me the ability to do, if I go to the high range on the amount, you get some quite ridiculous effects. This was added at the request of one of the beta testers. But why would I have a high range on the rate? Well, it means I can actually take this because this effectively is an oscillator that's affecting the pitch. I can actually take that into an audio range. So let's. So we can start getting to the land of weirdness if we want to. Okay, so now we also have an LFO that can control the filter. So let's get these filter frequencies down a bit. Let's start to get a bit of a nicer sound going on. Okay, so now I can also have a LFO that's going to affect the filter frequency. And I have the same idea here that I can choose much. This one won't go into audio, well, just quite, but not quite. This one won't go into audio range. What we do have is, on this one, is we have a different waveforms we can choose. We're on triangle at the moment, square, sine, sawtooth, and reverse sawtooth. And as usual with these synthesizers, that can also be affecting the filter at the same time that the envelope is affecting the filter. Okay, so but then we also have the similar effect as we have described before that can affect these tone variations here as well, and that's quite useful because that then gives us the opportunity to have sort of these things working against each other. So if I bring that in as well, let's go back to a sine waveform. Let's get this. Again, you can have the thing working differently to oscillator 1, oscillator 2 working against itself. Let's get this going at the same time. So it's almost like having a double filter effect because, you know, I'm affecting the waveform here at the same time that I'm also affecting the waveform there. So now all that's left to describe now is we have the final output here, which can be controlled by velocity again. So I can have the sound that's I can also have that so it's affected by velocity. probably hear I was hitting the keyboard harder then to get it to go louder. And the velocity effect is variable, so you can have it less or more to suit your playing style. And then we get into the effects. So we have a stereo delay, so it's two independent echo units, one for the left channel, one for the right channel, and then an overall amount that they're going to be introduced into the sound. These sort of tend to act more like an analog delay, if you remember the old analog DDLs. So they, you know, they're not the brightest of delays. Probably better if I have a percussive sound to hear that, I think. And obviously with careful adjustment of the controls, depending on where you have the pan set in here, you can get a ping pong effect in the sense that but these aren't tempo synced at all. In keeping with the sort of the retro feel of the instrument, I don't want to do that. I don't want to make it so that, you know, you can get all sort of rhythm effects with this. This is more a case of sort of adding some variety to the sound, variation of the sound. There's a phaser effect here, which I think is a little weak at the moment. Just get this thing back up. Then we've got a flange effect, which is again not amazing. And then lastly we have a reverb. So that's pretty much it for the controls. We have some patch controls over here, which I'm still trying to bottom out at the moment. They're not working exactly how I'd like. But that is S4, and hopefully this little demonstration has helped to understand some of the sections of it. It's currently out with the testers. Needs some patches written for it. There will be some changes, as I say. I might do some work on this effects section just to beef it up a bit. And then we'll hopefully have it available as 64-bit PC and Mac AU early in 2020. Thank you for listening.